decoupling is unrealistic. Even as the CEO of Raytheon said, we cannot decouple from China. We still need to resource our components from China. Somewhere around 70% of the U.S. military essential components is sourced from China. And so they can't, the idea that somehow U.S. is going to go to war against the people that provide your components for your military, that's just ridiculous.
Welcome back to Legitimate Targets, everybody. I hope you're all having a great day. I've got a very special guest joining us for the second time on our program, but for the first time, I guess, now that we are back on YouTube. Carl Zah, he is the host of the Silk and Steel podcast. He just participated in a very interesting trip in Xinjiang with Pepe Escobar. They documented their time there, and it's I think very important to get the truth out about what's going on there. But also, I mean, it's just I've never been there, but it looks absolutely beautiful, fascinating cultures. So we'll talk about that, as well as what is going on with the U.S. and China and the trade deal that still has not officially been signed, if I understand correctly. But Carl, thank you so much for joining me today. I'll have your YouTube channel linked in the video title up above so everyone can check it out. First of all, let's start off with the trade deal, actually. Let's start off with that. So I want to get your thoughts on this. As I mentioned, there's no official deal. There's a moratorium on the restrictions for rare earth, if I understand. And the U.S. is kind of on like a probation right now, right? I mean, this looks like a very weak Trump administration after this meeting.
Yeah, basically at end of this week, after the trade truce, it's not a deal, it's a ceasefire, essentially. We had a ceasefire before, back in when Scott Bessent chased down the Chinese vice premier all the way to Europe, to Geneva, and then to London to sign the ceasefire. But the ceasefire was broken when the U.S. Commerce Department slapped the BIS 50% rule on Chinese semiconductor companies at the end of September. So that expanded the Chinese semiconductor company on U.S. blacklist from 1,400 companies to 20,000. So that was a major escalation. That led to China impose even more stringent export control on rare earth on October 9th. And that led to Scott Bessent going ballistic and led to the final Trump-Xi meeting in Korea. So at the end of the day, they agreed to essentially roll back the tariff on China almost to the March level. So what was agreed to was the Trump administration will roll back the BIS 50% rule that sparked the latest outrage, and China on its part will agree to roll back the more stringent export control on rare earth that they imposed on October 9th. So this is just a rolling back. As you said, there's no deal. It's not final yet. What both sides agree is basically a ceasefire for another year, and possibly up to the time when Trump is planning to visit China. And we're going to have to see whether that ceasefire will hold, because we saw it got broken before. But right now, the deal looks pretty good to China. So Trump also removed 10% of the so-called fentanyl tariff on China, but by claiming that China have agreed to cooperate with U.S. on the fentanyl issue. But China has always said they would cooperate with U.S. on the fentanyl issue. So really, this is a rollback. This is a rollback to now essentially the effective tariff on China. Some say it's 47%, but because there's so many exemptions, it's more closer to like 20%. So in other words, the effective tariff on China is now approaching the same level as what U.S. is levy on its supposedly allies. I'm talking about UK, Australia, Canada, etc. So this essentially screw a lot of businesses who previously moved their supply chain out of China in April in anticipation of the high tariff imposed on China. So they just wasted 7 months of time, energy, and money to make that move. And now they would have been better off had they just stayed in China. This is not good for the US business, of course, because the one thing that business really hate is uncertainty. And the last 7 months was a lot of uncertainty. So essentially, overall, it's a good move for US China relationship. So finally, we're not heading towards abyss anymore. There's a pause in the falling through the roof of the Sino-American relationship. There's a temporary floor that's been put in. So hopefully this holds, because eventually I think the two countries still needs each other, and the decoupling is unrealistic. Even as the CEO of Raytheon said, we cannot decouple from China. We still need to resource our components from China. Somewhere around 70% of the U.S. military essential components is sourced from China. And so they can't. The idea that somehow U.S. is going to go to war against the people that provide your components for your military, that's just ridiculous.
It's like China owns, or they control rather, almost the total supply of not just the rare earths. Okay, they're important, but the processing is the extremely important part, because no one else does that. So like you said, you need tungsten for your military, for your defense sector. Well, how are you going to get processed tungsten to make your weapons? That is correct, right? It's like 95% they control, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, well, the previously the Trump administration tried to sign a whole bunch of rare earths supply agreement with countries like Australia, Cambodia, Thailand, Malaysia, Congo, but that just solved the part of digging the rare earth out of the earth crust. That's actually not the problem. China only digs about 60% of the rare earth, but what China really dominate is the refining process. China dominates about over 90% of the rare earth refining and making it into rare earth magnet, which goes into everything from cars to F-35s to missiles. And what was happening is, even in the largest rare earth mine in United States, a Mountain Pass mine in California, when they were digging out the rare earth at Mountain Pass mine, they were still shipping it to China for processing, because there's no refining capability in the United States. So even all these rare earth supply agreement that U.S. signed does not solve the bottleneck of refining. So what happened was, back in the 1970s, there was a time when United States was actually dominant in the rare earth industry. But the Wall Street geniuses, they did their calculation. They like, okay, rare earth is very polluting and it's very thin margin business. We don't actually make a lot of money out of it. So let other country have it. Let's offsource to Asia. And at that time, China just opened up. It was desperately poor. So it was willing to take on the literal dirty job of digging and refining rare earth. But what happened is that 40 years have passed. Now, all the new latest technology of refining rare earth was developed in China. All that intellectual property was developed in China. And Chinese top universities like Tsinghua or Fudan, they graduate tens of thousands of PhDs specialized in rare earth chemistry and how to do research and development. Whereas US university have none of that program, because that whole industry does not exist in US anymore. All the people that you once know how to do stuff back in 1970s, now they have all retired, and they fail to train new generation of human capital to replace them. So now, even if the Trump administration want to bring the rare earth supply chain back to the United States, it's gonna be a decade-long project. First they have to start from ground up. They first need to ship. First of all the machine tools are now Chinese. So they need to import the machine tools from China. They need to educate people, young people, start from scratch. And of course, it takes another 4 or 5 years to actually open a rare earth mine. And then another 4 or 5 years to open up a factory. And, another 10 years to train a person to do all these jobs. So we're looking at least a 10, 15-year long project. But this is an area where U.S. government doesn't do very well, which is industrial policy. China has a government that's designed to do industrial policy. They have like 5-year plans, which they publish every 5 years, and you can trust that the Chinese government will accomplish most of what they set out to do. But U.S. government is set up to do different things, which is mainly to funnel money from everybody else up to the military industrial complex, and that U.S. government does very well. It's a feature, not a bug, but it's not designed to do industrial policy the way China does, because that requires long-term vision. Whereas in U.S., everybody just worry about the next election cycle or the next quarter earning reports, or the stock market price. 10 years is too long for anybody to worry about. So this is why we're United States in the situation it is in right now. They knew about China's dominance of rare earth industry more than 10 years ago. Back in 2014, 2012, U.S. Congress was already complaining that China has dominated the rare earth supply chain. Well, guess what? Nothing was done, and so now China is finally flexing its muscle in the trade deal. And it took United States by surprise. One reason they took them by surprise is because when Trump administration first started slapping sanction on China back in the first Trump term, China has done minimum to counter it, because China didn't want to escalate into a full-blown trade war. China is doing everything it can to prevent this blowing up to a bigger crisis, because essentially China still wants to trade with United States. But what happened was U.S. government took that as a sign of weakness. It's like, look, China didn't respond. We can just keep on slapping sanction against them. They won't do anything against us because they have no cards. Well, it turns out not only China hold all the cards, they make all the cards in China. And so this is why, you have the latest rollback.
Explain to me, if you will, the importance of not just the actions that were taken onto China with regard to semiconductors and why that was upsetting, but also there was some sort of a fee that was imposed, a fine that was imposed on any Chinese-made naval vessels that were porting at U.S. docks. And the U.S. just said, well, if your ship is built in China, then we're going to charge you a hell of a lot extra if you come and dock in the United States. It's insane. And it seems like just a blatant and egregious attack on Chinese shipbuilding, which is growing immensely and very powerful. Even, the military, the civilian, the corporate sector for their ships. But these were kind of two of the main things that really pissed off the Chinese, right?
Yes. So I'll talk about the semiconductor later, but I'll talk about the shipbuilding first. That's one of the you're right. This both the expansion of the semiconductor blacklist and the slap of port fees on Chinese built ships. That's what triggers the latest round of escalation in the trade war. Now, the reason why they did that ostensibly is to because they saw that China is dominating the shipbuilding. Now more than 50%, China built more than 50% of the new ships that's coming online. And this really panicked the Pentagon, because they realized China has more than 200 times the shipbuilding capability than United States. How they're going to win against China in a naval context over Pacific if China has 200 times the shipbuilding capability, right? And again, this is one of the problems that was self-inflicted, because back in the days, the U.S. Congress provided a lot of put a lot of protective measures around the U.S. shipbuilding industry. Now, let's remember, U.S. used to be the most dominant shipbuilder in the world. That led all the way up to the World War II, when U.S. just outbuilt everybody. That's how U.S. won, because it's industrial capacity. But over the years, United States, they did a couple of things. One, Wall Street guys, they did their their calculations. Like, oh, okay, let's just offsource some of these production to Korea and Japan. And on the other hand, they are putting some protective measures for some specific shipyard that was building for the U.S. Navy. So these guys are protected from any competition. So this is kind of a double whammy. On one hand, a lot of the civilian shipbuilding was being offsourced to Korea and Japan, and on the other hand, those protected shipyard in the United States, they have, because they have guaranteed government contract to build for Pentagon, there was less incentive for innovation to invest into the latest technologies. So this is how the U.S. shipbuilding industry got left behind year after year. And China was actually a relatively late comer into shipbuilding. They only started to surpassing Korea maybe like 10 years ago. But now one of China's shipyard, the Jiangnan shipyard outside of Shanghai, has more capacity than all of the U.S. shipyard combined. I mean, that's, you think about that for a moment. And
your ships don't fall apart in the middle of the ocean. It's incredible.
And so that's why this so instead of, okay, let's compete on who can build the best ships, let's develop our own shipbuilding industry. They thought, okay, let's try to cripple the Chinese shipbuilding industry. This is like the Tanya Hardin tactic of competition. Let's kneecap our competitors, right? And so that was what was behind that raising of the port fees to like several millions of dollars on ship with origins in China or ship that was built in China, which is a lot of ships because China was building 55% of the world's shipping fleet. That affected a lot of business, a lot of shipping companies, and they had to rearrange their route to avoid United States, to avoid paying millions of dollars per ship. But that's one of the things that rolled back. Now, semiconductor is another area. Another thing about ships I should add is because U.S. have offsourced so much its shipbuilding capacity, and because the protected shipping industry in U.S. was falling behind in innovation, it started to affect the U.S. military industrial complex because they realize they don't have what it takes to do a naval build out, to compete with China in the Western Pacific. So they're trying to go around a U.S. legislation which prevented U.S. warship from being built overseas. So now that what they're doing is they're trying to get the Korean shipyard and the Japanese shipyard to help retrofit the U.S. Navy ships, right? Even the U.S. military industrial complex is giving up on America's shipbuilding, right? They are now offsourcing that to Korea and Japan. And another thing they try to do is invite South Korea, the Korean shipbuilders, to build factories, to build shipyards in the United States. But again, this is a whole area I could talk forever. But let's talk about semiconductors. Semiconductors is another area where U.S. decided to take the Tanya Hardin approach of competition because they realize China is moving very fast up the value chain into semiconductors. They noticed first with Huawei, when Huawei dominated the patents for 5G. And they thought, okay, we have to cripple Huawei. How do we do that? Okay, they found the weakest link in the Huawei supply chain is in the semiconductors. So even though Huawei were designing advanced semiconductors themselves, they were offsourcing the actual manufacturing of the semiconductors to Taiwan, to the Taiwan semiconductors. So Huawei was doing basically the thing that a lot of American firms are doing. For example, Apple, they will design their own chips, but then they will pass the design to Taiwan Semiconductors to have them actually make the physical chips, right? So Huawei was doing that. And this is when United States thought, aha, Okay, that is the weakest link. We're gonna put a law to blacklist um, Huawei from getting access to the most advanced semiconductors. So this is the origin of the semiconductor ban, but it goes beyond Huawei because one of the main driver of the U.S. semiconductor ban toward China is Eric Schmidt, who the former Google CEO, who also happened to have exclusive contract. His new company have exclusive contract with Pentagon to develop AI weapons. And his idea is like, we cannot lose the AI race versus China, right? We got to develop Terminator and Skynet first, then the Chinese will be screwed. Now, but the China are progressing up the AI tree too fast. So the way we got to slow them down, and the way we slow them down is to limit their access to the most advanced AI chips. Those are made by NVIDIA, another American company. So this led the whole this whole reason for the semiconductor restriction against China is to slow down China enough so US win the AI race. But in that front, it's not really working either, because the Chinese decide to just to work smarter. They realize, okay, so we cannot get our hands on the most advanced GPU chips from NVIDIA. What do? We can still use a lot of the older chips, but we do parallel processing, and we also optimize our software. That was a DeepSeek approach. The DeepSeek's like, you know what, we'll just have to work smarter to optimize our software so use less computing power. And that's exactly they did. The DeepSeek create a very efficient algorithm, so allow them to work with less chips and computing power to get the same results. And which is completely different from like the Microsoft Intel approach, right? Because the Microsoft Intel approach has always been, oh, Microsoft gonna put out the latest bloatware, which require you to buy the latest Intel Intel chips to power the latest Microsoft bloatware, right? So this the same logic is now applies to the AI boom in the United States. They say, okay, you just got to buy more GPUs, the latest NVIDIA GPUs. You got to build out data center. That's how you win. But the Chinese like, wait a minute. Okay, so now you're forcing us to think smarter, work smarter. So we optimize our software so we can get to the same place with less energy and less compute. And so anyway, but they're still persisting on their semiconductor restriction against China. That's why that led to the BIS 50% rule, which let United States walk over to the government of Netherlands and said, hey, we noticed there was a Dutch company, Nesperia, that's 100% owned by a Chinese parent company, Wintech. And I'm just going to put you on notice, because our expanded entity list against Chinese semiconductor companies, we're going to have to put Nesperia on our entity list unless you do something. So that led to the Dutch government to seize the company Nesperia from its Chinese parent company, Wintech, using a very dubious clause, basically a war provision, claiming they need that company for national security reasons. And that led to a cascading event of semiconductor supply chain crisis, because the Nesperia, even though their headquarters is based in Netherlands, its manufacturing arm is in China. So now the Chinese government told the manufacturing arm of Nesperia, okay, you don't have to listen to your headquarters in Netherlands anymore. That was an illegal seizure by the Dutch government. You just need to make sure you supply the domestic Chinese market first. And the other foreign buyers of your semiconductors, they have to sign the new contract with you rather than honor the contract with their Dutch the Dutch headquarters. And that led to a whole semiconductor shortage, because of GM, German automakers, Japanese, they all say they're weeks from running out of chips they needed in their cars, because this is a whole mess. And this is another reason the Trump decided to roll back the BIS 50% rule. But now Dutch government is going to be the one that's left holding the bag. Now, the whole reason to seize the Chinese company does not exist anymore. Yet, I think they're going to face the consequences because now all these German automakers, Japanese automakers, American automakers are looking at them like, what are you doing? It's because of you, we're not able to access our semiconductor we need in our cars.
It's incredible. It's really incredible. And one last point before we talk about your trip with Pepe. I think it was noteworthy that in the meeting with President Xi Jinping, Trump and his team, if I read the readout correctly, they didn't even bring up the question of Taiwan in any serious way, like from a separatist perspective, anything like that. And they also didn't bring up the Chinese, ignoring the new sanctions on Rosneft and Lukoil, the Russian oil and gas firms that the U.S. should sanction in an attempt to pressure China and India to stop the trade with them. This is just total failure by the United States, right?
Yeah, I mean, because there's no reason to bring up because they know what the Chinese response will be. Chinese has been very consistent. It's like from whom we buy our oil from is our business. It's none of your business. This is a sovereignty issue. We get to decide who we can have a normal trading relationship with, and we decide to buy Russian oil, and we will continually to do so. Nobody is going to tell us otherwise. This is why U.S. backed off, because at the end of the day, they know China still hold the cards over the rare earth issue, and there's no way for China to force the issue on the Russian oil purchase issue, because U.S. really have no cards in that regards.
Nothing they can do. They are completely screwed at this point. I want to also talk about, like I said, your trip through Xinjiang. Tell me about that, what you guys were doing. It looked very interesting. I know Pepe was very excited about that trip, and I'm very jealous of you guys. I want to go there as well. I've only been to Shanghai, so hopefully sometime in the near future, I'll make my way out there and see more of China. But this is also a region everyone, I think, understands this, that is lied about so much in the West. They say that there's a Uyghur genocide of the ethnic, Uyghurs, the Muslims. They say that no one's allowed there, but apparently you guys were allowed to go there. Pepe was allowed to go there and just kind of document what was going on.
As long as you have a valid Chinese visa, you can go. There's no restriction. And Pepe, because he has a European passport, he can go visa free for 30 days. Right now, most EU citizens. That China just extended the 30 days visa free to Russian citizens as well, by the way. So now a lot of countries' citizens can visit China visa free for 30 days. So as long as you have that, you can just go to Xinjiang, no problem. And we actually planned this trip earlier this year. I met Pepe in Bangkok. And he said, "Oh, I'm going to Xinjiang." I'm like, "Really? I want to go. I'll be your tour guide / translator." He's like, "Okay, yeah, deal." At that time, through our mutual acquaintance, we know a German entrepreneur who has business in China, so he helped sponsor our trip. And so we had a photography team. We had like 4 or 5 Land Cruisers. We drove about, in 2 weeks, we drove 3,700 kilometers through Xinjiang. We did a very extensive trip. We developed a butt of iron, just being able to sit in cars for hours while we traverse the desert. We actually traversed the world's 2nd largest moving sand desert, Taklamakan, because China was able to build a highway directly cutting across. So they built these very impressive sand stabilization project made of straw grids on both sides of the highway, so they fix the sand dune in place, and then so the sand doesn't cover the highway. And we drove about, I think took us 6 hours to drive through that. It's incredible landscape. I highly recommend to anybody. I mean, not just Xinjiang, but just China in general. Because every time I visit, I feel like I'm visiting a new place. Because everything, the last time before my this current trip. Oh, I was in China in May as well. But before this year, the last time I was in China was 6 years ago, before pandemic. And even in the 6 years, a lot of things have changed. I mean, a lot of the hotels we were staying in Xinjiang, they were built within last year, and they're very, very nice hotels. Like those hotels that would cost you, 400 euros in Europe. And they'll cost you a bundle if you was in the West. But in China, it was very, very affordable. You can have some very nice hotel anywhere from like 40 to 80 US dollars. And,
Wow.
and the same hotel will cost you like $500 in New York or something like that. But it's very nice, very modern. They really Chinese government invests a lot in the tourist developing the local tourism industry. So when we went, we actually were one of the few foreigners there, because Pepe, they were getting a lot of attention from the locals. Everybody wanted to take picture with them, want to come up and practice English, because apparently there was a sharp drop off of the foreign travelers to Xinjiang after 2008. Part because of this propaganda that was waged in the West. And so our tour guide told us, basically a lot of English speaking tour guide, they have to switch careers after 2008. They have to jump ship to like trading companies or other places that better leverage their English language skills, because there weren't just enough foreign travelers coming to Xinjiang. What we saw is mostly domestic tourism, like million. I think I just saw a report from BBC that actually said more than 300 million tourists now have visited Xinjiang. 300 million.
Wow.
Yeah, you heard that right. And guess what? All these tourists that visit in Xinjiang, you don't see any videos, footages leaking out of atrocities. You would think, over 300 million people all taking cell phones and cameras through Xinjiang, they would have seen something, right? And we were part of that 300 million, and I can confirm. I was just at one point I was just walking around Kashgar, and it was just I was filming. I didn't say anything because I think by posting that footage alone would dispel a lot of narratives. Because like look what genocide, you just see all these Uyghurs people just going about their daily business, on a very busy street in Kashgar. And that's the reality. That's the reality of life in Xinjiang. And we did see a lot of investment into tourism infrastructure. I already talked about hotels, but we see a lot of local people are getting employed in the tour. My guess is tourism is probably one of the largest employers of the local people in Xinjiang right now, because of the flood of tourists that's going to Xinjiang and enjoying their stay. We went to even small towns, and they will be full of tourists. And
Wow.
there'll be a lot of local people working in either service industry or the tourism related industry. And we also met Uyghur tourists, because we went to the Kashgar old town. And one of the popular thing to do for the tourists is to like dress up as the ancient Uyghur princesses, and then have a photographer follow them around to take pictures, right? And I thought, okay, that was just the thing that tourists from outside of Xinjiang do. And then I saw a lot of Uyghur people doing the same thing. So I'm like, what's going on? So I went to ask them. They say, oh, we're also tourists. We're just from different part of Xinjiang. We're from like Aksu. We're from
Oh, wow.
Kucha, and we're just in town enjoying our vacation. So it's a place to be enjoyed by everybody.
Well, maybe the next ISO speed visit to China should be there. I think that would be very moving to everyone. And the food there, as I'm in Moscow. There's Uyghur restaurants here. The food, Uzbek food, Uyghur food, and Georgian food, my favorite food in the world. So, is it very good?
If you're a meat lover, you are in heaven,
Yes.
right? Because
Yes.
everything is lamb. Their lamb, their beef is really good. The rice, they call it polo or pilaf. It's very, very good. I mean, I could eat that stuff every day. Like,
Same.
Pepe agree with me. We were having the noodle, the lakman, and the polo, the rice, and the lamb skewers kebab every day, and it was great. It was amazing.
I'm very jealous. Carl Zah, thank you so much for joining me. Everyone, be sure to subscribe to the Silk and Steel podcast. Follow Carl on Twitter. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackson. Anytime.